The story of a game, and especially an MMORPG, is one of the biggest driving factors of whether or not a player will actually enjoy their time in an MMO. Now, in this series, I've been comparing Guild Wars 2 and Final Fantasy XIV, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about first and foremost, of course, is going to be the story. Now, this is one of the 5 different topics that I wanted to cover, which being the combat, the classes, the story, where we are now, the leveling experience, as well as the end game. I wanted to look at those 5 different topics and compare which MMO does it better. Now, and I will just say that this is strictly my opinion based off of the time that I've spent in these games. Probably spent about 10 years in Guild Wars 2, and I've recently put in about 200 hours into Final Fantasy XIV. So I feel that I've gotten a good enough taste to understand what is going on and how much the story actually plays into the gameplay itself. Make sure to like and subscribe to follow along with all of these videos for this particular series. And yeah, here we go. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at Final Fantasy XIV's story. I have spoken about this a number of different times, and I will continue to speak about this a number of times. Final Fantasy XIV's story is as good as they have said it. Now, I was a little bit, well, to be honest, I didn't believe. I wasn't a believer when I started playing Final Fantasy XIV of how good the story was. I had been told that the story is really good, that it's moving. There's a lot of awesome, epic moments. However, I really wasn't that impressed from the outside, and that's something that I had to get over. Once I actually played the story and I really started to get involved, I understood why it was so damn good. There is so much moving in the story that it has not only taken me from like super low, sad, terrible moments to really epic high moments where you actually feel like you're the hero. That's pretty cool. Video games don't really do that to me that often. That's why I'm stressing that this is a really big deal. Now, the story does have a lot of likable characters, and there's a lot of sudden twists and turns, which you would expect from any kind of epic novel. It was a bit difficult to get into, to get started up. The story wasn't bad per se, it was just slow. And I think there's an important distinction there is that in this day and age, I feel like a lot of players are just more into that quick satisfaction. Let me see as much as I can see as quickly as I can see, and I'll make that judgment after, you know, like 5 hours if I'm going to like this game. Now, to be fair, 5 hours into any game is probably enough to know whether or not you're going to want to play it more. But also looking in that same regard, sometimes games get a lot better as you invest more time, which can be said across the board. Now, Final Fantasy XIV, again, the base game does take a little bit to pick up, and there are times where it's albeit a bit slow, and that is only me being fair. However, I've gotten to the point where I'm actually post Heavensward, and it is just incredible. By the way, Heavensward is the first expansion, and it's completely free. The next expansion, which is Stormblood, is completely free, and then I have to start paying after putting like 300 hours into the game. I'm just saying, you don't really lose anything by jumping into the story. What's important to note, especially about the story, is as it has progressed, it has gotten thematically a lot better. Now, one of the things that I noted, especially early on, is that there's a lot of reading for the story. That's because a lot of the characters were not voice acted early on, which, to be fair, they kind of switched over. The whole idea of A Realm Reborn is that the game was completely scrapped after their 1.0 release, because it wasn't up to their standards, and in a year they turned over a game that was pretty good, and it was a snowball effect. It started getting better and better every year, so kudos to them. But with that, the story picks up, and if you're paying attention, and that's what's really important, is that if you pay attention to the little details as you go through, as you're playing through the main story, it pays off later. And I won't spoil anything, but I will say that if you do just play the game and you play the story, you just pay attention. There's little tidbits, there's little characters that pop up here and there. It's like a really good post-reward, long haul kind of reward that I have gotten personally in my experience from just playing this game. And again, this is all free trial, so you really don't have that much to lose. Now let's go ahead and look at Guild Wars 2 Story. Now, Guild Wars 2 Story is another long one compared to Final Fantasy XIV, where we had about like 10 years. Guild Wars 2 is around that same time. Given the story for Guild Wars 2, it is far less emphasized within the MMORPG area. The Guild Wars 2 story is there. It is important, however, it is more so a means to move the function of the game forward. One of Guild Wars 2's best features is their open world and exploration. There's tons of little hidden things that you can find as you're going through. Now, the story does have voice-acted characters and specific instances that you'll have to go through. However, it is essentially a means of the overarching story of what we are going through and why we are here in these particular zones and why we're working to fight, this, we'll say, dragon, because if you haven't figured it out, we fight dragons in Guild Wars 2. Now, what's also important to note, especially talking about the story, is that it does pick up later. Now, the base game, the trial game, which you'll have essentially from level 1 all the way up to 80, is every 10 levels, you will have some story missions. And the story missions essentially are based off of the choices from your character up until about like level 30. And then from there, it all meshes together into a single tale that you fight all the way up until max level. Now, with that, the story does pick up a lot better as the game has progressed. So into the Heart of Thorns expansion, Path of Fire expansion, End of Dragons, and so on and so forth. So the story does have its emphasis, and it will get better as you put more time into it, very similar to what you would say for Final Fantasy XIV. However, there's far less emphasis on the story in the game as compared to FF14. And I think that's by design. The story is there, yes. However, it is about your character maneuvering through the world and all the different specific zones and instances, everything that is what makes Guild Wars 2 great. And I think that's important to note when comparing it to any other MMORPG, is that the story is pretty good. The story is pretty good. I give it a solid about like 7 or 8 out of 10. However, it is not necessarily super crucial for you to understand what we are doing. It's important, but I wouldn't say that it's the best feature of the game. Now, having said that, I think you can kind of understand where I'm going with this. In my opinion, Final Fantasy XIV does have the better story of a game. And I really don't even know if I needed to do this video to really have that opinion, as I've spoken about it a number of times. But the story in Final Fantasy XIV is just really damn good, and it has a lot of really interesting characters, funny moments, sad moments, happy moments. Whereas compared to Guild Wars 2, I didn't really feel any of those emotions. There were some sudden turns, and there were some twists that I wasn't quite ready for. There really wasn't too much that made me say, oh wow, that was really, really cool. I do like to bring up the fact of the expansion Path of Fire. There's a Living World season, which is essentially like DLC for the game. It's meant to bridge the gap between the expansions. Living World Season 4 was arguably, actually I won't even say arguably, in my opinion, is the best piece of storytelling content in the whole game, hands down, in my opinion. I won't spoil anything. However, it is just really, really good. I really, really enjoyed that one. But having said that, the main Guild Wars 2 story and what you were following through really didn't have too much interest, in my opinion. It really didn't stick with me the way that the story for Final Fantasy XIV is going. Now, it's not to say that I don't remember anything about the story. It's more so to highlight the fact that the story, again, is the motor device in Guild Wars 2. It is transporting you from one to another to another. And I think that's important to note when comparing it to Final Fantasy XIV, which the main, we'll say, heavy hitter of the game, almost the main emphasis of the game, is the story. And of course, having said all that, this is just strictly my opinion. And I know that there's some people who believe that Guild Wars 2 story was really, really good, or some players who think Final Fantasy XIV story is just overrated, and that's okay. And again, that's why I'm making this series, to talk about the ups and downs and the kind of comparison between the two, as a means to strike up a conversation to see, what do you guys think? I implore you, please comment down below on your opinion of the game. Which game does it better? Which game has a better story? I'd be interested in seeing what you think. Now, in my previous video, I went ahead and talked about the different classes and who does it better, and you can see that video here. Otherwise, stay caffeinated, folks.